The halls of Liberty High School fell silent as Michael Bennett, the Canadian-born English teacher, made his way to Principal Richard Walters' office. The summons had come during his lunch break, a terse email with no explanation. As he approached, the oak door with Principal stenciled in bold letters, the knot in his stomach tightened. "Come in," a gruff voice commanded before Michael could even knock. Principal Walters sat behind his desk, an American flag pin gleaming on his lapel, a red cap visible on the coat rack behind him. His lips curled into what might have been mistaken for a smile, if not for the coldness in his eyes. "Mr. Bennett, please sit down." Michael settled into the chair across from Walters, maintaining the calm demeanor that had earned him the respect of students and fellow teachers alike over his 7 years at Liberty High. "You wanted to see me, Richard?" Principal Walters' eye twitched at the informal address. "That's Principal Walters, Mr. Bennett. And yes, I did." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "I'll cut to the chase. The school board and I have been reviewing staff performance, and we've decided to make some changes." Michael nodded slowly, already sensing where this was heading. "Your contract will not be renewed for next year. In fact, we'll be placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside the window, students laughed and shouted across the courtyard, oblivious to the tension within the principal's office. "I ask why?" Michael's voice remained steady, betraying none of the shock coursing through him. Walters shrugged. "You're simply not the right fit for Liberty High anymore. Your teaching methods are unconventional. This is a traditional American school with traditional American values." He leaned forward, any pretense of professionalism slipping away. "Maybe go back to Canada. We don't need your kind here." Michael's jaw clenched, but his expression remained composed. 7 years of teaching teenagers had perfected his poker face. "I'd like a real reason, Richard. I have exemplary evaluations, the highest test scores in the English department, and 3 Teacher of the Year awards." Principal Walters' face flushed. "Those awards don't mean anything. Not around here. So, this isn't about my teaching ability? It's about attitude, Bennett. About fit." Walters stood up, pacing behind his desk. "You've been undermining our values since day one, assigning those books with, let's call them, alternative viewpoints, having discussions about social issues that have no place in a classroom." Through the glass partition, Michael noticed Miss Rodriguez from the Spanish department pause, pretending to organize papers while clearly listening in. 2 other teachers lingered nearby, exchanging concerned glances. "You mean teaching students critical thinking?" Michael asked. "Exposing them to diverse perspectives?" "I mean pushing your woke Canadian agenda." Walters slammed his hand on the desk. "This is America. We do things differently here. I teach the approved curriculum, with your slant on it. Always so soft, so understanding." He mockingly raised his voice an octave. "There are no wrong answers, just different perspectives. That's not how the real world works." Michael took a deep breath. His students flashed through his mind. Jamal, who'd been accepted to Princeton. Emma, who'd overcome her stutter through debate club. Tyler, who'd finally found his voice in Michael's creative writing elective. "The students seem to disagree with your assessment." "The students don't run this school," Walters snapped. "I do. And I say you're done." Ms. Rodriguez had been joined by 2 students now, their faces pressed against the glass, whispering urgently. Michael exhaled slowly, straightening in his chair. "All right. I guess I should tell you something." Principal Walters barked out a laugh, the sound sharp and dismissive. "What? Could you possibly tell me that would matter now? Your citizenship application got approved? You're finally a real American?" He chuckled at his own joke. Too little, too late. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he calmly pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and began typing a message. His fingers moved deliberately across the screen, each tap punctuated by the growing confusion on Walter's face. "What do you think you're doing?" the principal demanded. "Sending a message," Michael replied, pressing "send" with a finality that seemed to echo in the small office. "To who? Your union rep?" Walters scoffed. "Good luck with that. I've documented everything. This is a right-to-work state, Bennett." The hallway outside had grown crowded. News traveled fast in high schools. Through the glass, at least a dozen students had gathered, phones in hand, whispering urgently. Among them were several members of the debate team Michael coached, along with Tyler from his AP English class. "Put that phone away," Walters snapped. "You're still on school property, and I'm still your boss for the next—" His eyes darted to the clock. 20 minutes while HR processes your paperwork." Michael slipped the phone back into his pocket, a strange calmness settling over him. 7 years at Liberty High had taught him patience. 7 years of navigating small-town politics, of carefully building relationships, of doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy. "You know, Richard, I've always wondered something about you," Michael said, leaning forward slightly. "Did you ever actually check my background before hiring me?" The principal's eyes narrowed. "What kind of question is that? Of course, HR did the standard checks, but you personally? Did you ever look beyond Canadian teacher with good references?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Walter's face for the first time. Outside, the crowd had doubled. Someone had propped the office door open, and snippets of conversation drifted in. "Can't believe he's finally doing it." About time someone stood up to. The principal's phone buzzed. Then again, and again. He glanced down at the screen, confusion morphing into alarm. "What the hell did you just do?" Michael leaned back in his chair, a subtle shift in his posture that spoke volumes. For 7 years, he'd been the mild-mannered Canadian English teacher, polite, accommodating, careful not to make waves in this conservative town. But there was steel beneath that maple leaf exterior. "Before I came to Liberty High, I worked as an education correspondent for the Toronto Globe, covered education policy across North America for 6 years. Michael's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Made some interesting connections." Walter's phone continued buzzing. He glanced at it nervously but maintained his bravado. "So what? You were a journalist. Big deal." "My college roommate is now senior education editor at the New York Times. My cousin chairs the state Board of Education. And that book I published last year on innovative teaching methods? It put me in touch with some fascinating people." The principal's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "You're bluffing. This is a pathetic attempt to save your job." By now, the doorway was crowded with faces. Ms. Rodriguez had been joined by Coach Daniels and Dr. Patel from the science department. Behind them, students pressed forward, many filming with their phones. Michael noticed Jamal Wilson, his former debate captain who'd graduated last year, now wearing a press badge from the local newspaper. "I'm not trying to save my job, Richard. I'm giving you a chance to save yours." On cue, Walter's desk phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. And again. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Michael asked. "It might be important." With a shaking hand, Walters picked up the receiver. "This is Principal Walters." His face paled as he listened. "Yes, sir, I understand. But—" He was cut off. "Yes, he's right here." The crowd in the hallway had grown so large that the school security guard arrived, not to disperse them but joining their ranks, curiosity winning over duty. Walters hung up, sweat beading on his forehead. That was the superintendent. Michael tilted his head slightly, meeting the principal's gaze. "I don't think you understand who you just fired." "This is ridiculous," Walters spat, attempting to regain control. "One phone call doesn't change anything. I'm still the principal here." "Of course you are," Michael agreed mildly. For now, the principal's computer chimed with incoming emails. His phone continued buzzing with texts and calls. The noise grew so persistent that he slammed his hand down on the desk. "Whatever connections you think you have, they don't override my authority in this school." Michael said nothing, simply checking his watch. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the electronic symphony of Walter's devices demanding attention. Finally, curiosity overcame pride. Walters grabbed his phone, scrolling through messages with increasingly frantic movements. His complexion shifted from red to ashen. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I didn't do anything," Michael replied. "You did. You fired a teacher for political reasons while being recorded by at least—" He glanced toward the door, counting. 15 students who are currently live-streaming this conversation." On cue, Walter's office phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Board President Michaels. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Michael asked. The principal reached for the phone with a trembling hand, but before he could answer, his email notification chimed again. Walters glanced at his computer screen and froze. "That's likely the email from my attorney," Michael offered helpfully. "The one confirming our wrongful termination suit. Or perhaps it's from Education Weekly. They've been wanting to do a feature on academic freedom in conservative districts." The crowd outside the office had grown so large that Assistant Principal Garcia was now trying to disperse them with little success. "The hashtag #SaveMrBennett is trending locally," called out Emma Chen from the doorway, holding up her phone. "And the school board members are getting tagged in every post." Walter's face contorted with disbelief. His carefully constructed kingdom was collapsing around him, and all because of the quiet Canadian he'd so badly underestimated. "No, this has to be a joke." "It's not a joke, Richard. It's accountability," Michael said, rising from his chair. The power dynamic had shifted completely, but he took no visible pleasure in it. "Let me be clear about what happens next." Michael moved to close the office door, reducing their audience but not eliminating it. The glass walls still provided visibility. This conversation was private but transparent, just like his teaching philosophy. The school board will receive not only today's recording, but 7 years of documented incidents where you've undermined teachers based on political affiliation rather than performance. Walters slumped in his chair. "You've been collecting evidence against me all this time?" "I've been protecting myself. There's a difference." Michael's voice remained steady. "They'll also receive testimonials from graduates now attending Princeton, Yale, and Stanford who credit their success to the very teaching methods you called too soft." Outside, the crowd had organized. Ms. Rodriguez was collecting statements from students, while Coach Daniels stood protectively by the door. The school felt alive with purpose, not divided, but united against injustice. "The superintendent has already received the formal complaint," Michael continued. "And yes, my cousin on the state board has been briefed, not because of nepotism, but because she's concerned about educational standards being compromised by political agendas." Walter's bluster had evaporated completely. "What do you want?" he asked, defeat evident in his voice. "I want what I've always wanted, for Liberty High to be a place where students learn to think, not what to think, where teachers are evaluated on their effectiveness, not their politics." The American flag pin on Walter's lapel caught the fluorescent light as he shifted uncomfortably. "The superintendent will be here in 20 minutes, Michael said, checking his phone. "The board president in 30. My attorney is already in town. That book tour I mentioned brought me to some interesting places." He leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "So, should I pack my things? Or should you?" You can't just—" Walter stammered, his authority dissolving with each broken sentence. "There are procedures, protocols, like the ones you followed when firing me without cause?" Michael asked mildly. The principal's eyes darted around his office, seeking escape but finding none. Outside, the crowd had grown quieter, more organized. Students held impromptu signs, "We stand with Mr. Bennett," and "Education over politics." "Look, Bennett, maybe we can work something out," Walters said, lowering his voice. "I may have been hasty." Hasty or discriminatory? Michael remained standing, calm in the eye of the storm he'd created. "This isn't personal, Richard. It never was for me." The principal's phone rang again. He answered it, his voice switching to an obsequious tone that would have shocked his staff had they heard it. "Yes, Dr. Miller. I understand the board's concern. No, I can explain. Of course, full cooperation. Right away, sir." He hung up, sweat visible on his brow. From professional to pathetic in 20 minutes flat. "The board wants all documentation related to your dismissal," Walters mumbled. "Documentation that doesn't exist," Michael clarified, "because there were no legitimate grounds." Assistant Principal Garcia appeared at the door, her expression grave. "Richard, Superintendent Hammond just arrived. He's waiting in the conference room." The color drained from Walter's face. "Already? He's not supposed to be here until—" "He was in the area," Garcia replied, avoiding eye contact. "Something about an emergency board meeting being called." Michael gathered his belongings, straightening his jacket with dignified movements. 7 years of quiet dignity had prepared him for this moment. "For the record," he said softly, "I became an American citizen last year. This is my country too, and its educational values are worth fighting for." The hallway parted as Superintendent Hammond, a tall figure with a stern expression, strode toward the office. His presence commanded immediate respect, something Walters had always tried to force but never earned. "We need to talk," the superintendent announced, looking directly at Walters. "In private. Now." 3 weeks later, Michael Bennett stood before his AP English class, discussing the theme of justice in To Kill a Mockingbird. The classroom buzzed with energy. Students engaged, hands raised, minds open. The changes at Liberty High had been swift but measured. Principal Walters had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, with Assistant Principal Garcia stepping into the interim role. The school board had unanimously voted to reinstate Michael with a formal apology and back pay. "Mr. Bennett," Jamal Wilson called from the doorway. The former student, now junior reporter, smiled broadly. "They need you in the auditorium. Special announcement." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Class, continue discussing the parallels between the novel and modern justice systems. I'll be back shortly." The hallways felt different now. Teachers chatted, openly, displaying books that had previously been kept hidden. A new banner hung in the main corridor, "Liberty High, where critical thinking matters." In the auditorium, Michael found the entire school assembled. Staff, students, even some parents and board members filled the seats. Garcia stood at the podium, spotting him as he entered. "Ah, there he is. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Bennett." The applause was deafening. Michael walked toward the stage, confused but moved. "Mr. Bennett," Garcia began, "on behalf of the school board and administration, we're proud to announce Liberty High's nomination for the State Excellence in Education Award, specifically citing our commitment to inclusive teaching practices and critical thinking." She stepped aside, revealing a plaque. "And we're even prouder to announce your selection as the new assistant principal of curriculum development." The cheers erupted again. Michael took the podium, overwhelmed. Through the side door, he caught a glimpse of Walters cleaning out his office, witnessed by no one, mourned by few. "Thank you," Michael said simply. "I came to America because I believed in its promise, that ideas could be debated, that truth could prevail, that education could transform." He looked out at the sea, of faces at the future he'd fought to protect. "Turns out, I wasn't the one who didn't belong here after all."